The massive crystalline dome of the Taraxian Grand Assembly stretched high above the gathered representatives, its walls pulsing with soft blue light that seemed to breathe with the tension in the room. Delegates from dozens of worlds filled the floating platforms that orbited the central speaking chamber, their various forms creating a bizarre tapestry of galactic civilization. Admiral Kang Minho adjusted his simple blue Earth Defense Force uniform as he waited at the human platform. The fabric looked almost crude compared to the shimmering energy suits of the Zephyrite or the ornate battle armor worn by Krillian war chiefs. His weathered hands remained steady on the podium's edge, even as the heated arguments swirled around him like a storm. Above them all, massive holographic displays showed the horror that had brought them together. Star maps flickered between red and black as system after system vanished from galactic charts. The Void Devourers had awakened from whatever deep space slumber had held them for millennia, and they were hungry. Look at these readings. General. Vextar's four muscular arms swept through holographic data streams, his reptilian features twisted with barely controlled rage. The Krillian's biomechanical implants glowed angry red as he spoke. 17 colonies consumed in 3 weeks. My plasma destroyers can reduce a planet to molten rock in minutes, yet these creatures shrug off direct hits like raindrops. The assembled delegates murmured agreement, their translation devices creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and harmonics. Near the chamber's center, the Zephyrite prime node materialized fully, its humanoid form constructed entirely of shifting, silver light. General Vextar speaks truth, though his methods lack precision, the artificial being said, its voice carrying the cold perfection of pure logic. Our deep space sensors have analyzed devourer feeding patterns. They consume stellar energy at the quantum level, converting matter directly into dark energy matrices. Standard energy weapons appear to strengthen rather than harm them. A collective shudder ran through the assembly. Many species had built their entire military doctrines around energy-based weaponry. The thought that their most powerful weapons might actually feed their enemies was terrifying. The ethereal collective's representative, a being of pure thought housed in a shimmering containment field, pulsed with concern. Our psychic probes cannot even touch their minds. They exist in dimensions our consciousness cannot reach. Then we must adapt, declared Ambassador Zix Andra of the Andromedan Trade Union, her 3 heads speaking in perfect unison. Pool our resources. Combine Krillian firepower with Zephyrite computational abilities and ethereal psychic networks. Nods and gestures of agreement rippled through the chamber. It made sense. Unite the galaxy's most advanced civilizations against this ancient threat. The mathematics seemed simple enough. That's when Admiral Kang stepped forward, his movement so quiet that many delegates didn't notice at first. Unlike the other representatives who commanded attention through advanced technology or imposing physical presence, the human admiral simply waited. His dark eyes held a patience that seemed out of place in the urgent atmosphere. "Honored delegates," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems without enhancement. "Earth requests permission to contribute to the galactic defense effort." The Taraxian Chancellor, whose crystalline form served as both host and moderator, flickered with what might have been surprise. "Admiral Kang, humanity's participation is noted. However, this discussion centers on military capabilities of sufficient scale to threaten entities that consume star systems." Commander Park Jiwon, standing just behind the Admiral, felt her jaw tighten. The dismissive undertone was clear, even through the translation matrices. She'd served with Minho for 15 years, fought beside him in the Titan Rebellion and the Mars Colony Wars. The man had never backed down from impossible odds. "We understand the scale," Admiral Kang replied calmly. "Our fleet may use kinetic weapons and chemical propulsion, but we've studied the Devourer attack patterns. We believe there are vulnerabilities that energy-based approaches might miss, General." Vextar's laugh was a harsh bark that echoed off the crystal walls. "Kinetic weapons? You mean throwing rocks at creatures that eat stars?" The laughter that followed wasn't cruel exactly, but it carried the casual dismissal of adults watching children play war with toy soldiers. The Zephyrite prime node's form brightened slightly in what passed for amusement among their kind. "Admiral, the artificial being said with mechanical patience. Our calculations indicate that kinetic projectiles would require impossible velocities to achieve meaningful impact against Devourer bio-armor. The energy expenditure alone would... We've run the numbers differently, Admiral Kang interrupted gently, producing a small data crystal. If I could demonstrate... Demonstrations waste time we don't have. The Chancellor's voice rang out with finality. Honored humans, your courage is admirable, but this threat requires technologies beyond chemical combustion and metal projectiles. Perhaps when your species develops proper energy shielding and quantum computation matrices, we might find applications for your enthusiasm. The word enthusiasm hung in the air like a condescending pat on the head. Commander Park's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but Admiral Kang simply bowed with the same respectful dignity he'd maintained throughout the session. We understand your position, he said quietly. Should circumstances change, Earth stands ready to assist. As the human delegation made their way toward the exit, whispered conversations followed in their wake, most focused on the real discussion of coordinating energy weapon arrays and AI battle networks. A few delegates spared pitying glances for the humans and their primitive offer to help. The Chancellor's parting words echoed through the chamber's acoustic systems. Perhaps the humans could assist with evacuation efforts. Their cargo vessels might prove adequate for refugee transport, while the advanced civilizations handle the actual fighting. Admiral Kang paused at the threshold, his weathered face showing the slightest hint of a smile that none of the alien delegates would have recognized as dangerous. Commander Park caught the expression and felt a familiar chill. She'd seen that look before, usually right before her admiral did something that military textbooks said was impossible, outside the Grand Assembly. As their transport lifted away from the crystal spires, Park finally spoke. Sir, they have no idea what's coming, do they? Admiral Kang watched the alien megastructures shrink below them, his expression thoughtful. No, Commander. They see technology where they should see tactics. They measure firepower where they should measure will. The Devourers have faced energy, weapons for millions of years. He turned from the viewport, his eyes holding secrets that would soon reshape the galaxy. But they've never faced humans. The bridge of the UES Taiwan hummed with quiet efficiency as Admiral Kang Minho studied the holographic battlefield display floating before his command chair. 3 months had passed since the Galactic Council's dismissal, and the galaxy was paying the price for their arrogance. The tactical screen showed nothing but empty space, where the Krillian 7th Battle Fleet had made their final stand just hours ago. Lieutenant Kim Sujin's fingers danced across her sensor console, her young face pale with the horror of what she was witnessing. Admiral, I'm reading the final transmission logs from the Krillian flagship Wrath of Vextar before it went dark. They managed to score direct hits with their Nova-class plasma cannons, but sir... She paused, double-checking her readings. The Devourer constructs didn't just absorb the energy, they grew larger. Captain Lee Doyun stood beside the main tactical display, his weathered hands gripping the rail as he watched the battle recordings play out in slow motion. The 12 Krillian dreadnoughts had been magnificent war vessels, each one the size of a small city and bristling with enough firepower to crack a moon. Their plasma cannons could superheat matter to stellar core temperatures in microseconds. Look at this sequence. Captain Lee pointed to a section of the recording where the lead Krillian ship unleashed everything it had at the closest Devourer. The creature was massive, easily 10 kilometers long, its surface rippling with dark matter that seemed to bend light around it. First salvo hits here, full spread of plasma torpedoes. Watch what happens. The bridge crew leaned forward as the recording showed the Devourer's reaction. Instead of burning away or exploding, the Archoid creature's surface simply opened like a flower, revealing pulsing organs that drank in the plasma energy, like a man dying of thirst. The absorbed energy coursed through the creature's body in veins of sickly light, and Admiral Kang could see it literally growing as they watched. Energy absorption rate increased by 400% after initial contact, Lieutenant Kim reported, her voice barely steady. By the end of the engagement, the lead Devourer was feeding so efficiently that it was pulling power directly from the Krillian ship's reactors through some kind of quantum field effect. The final moments of the battle were almost too horrible to watch. The proud Krillian warships, stripped of power, had drifted helplessly as tendril-like appendages emerged from the Devourers. The creatures didn't just destroy the ships, they consumed them completely, metal, crew and all, converting every atom into more of their dark substance. The Zephyrite AI fleets didn't fare any better, Captain Lee continued, switching to another set of recordings. Those synthetic bastards thought their quantum computers could outthink million-year-old space parasites. This battle footage was even more disturbing. The Zephyrite Collective had sent their finest automated war fleet, 100 sleek silver vessels controlled by networked artificial intelligences that could process tactical data faster than organic minds could even comprehend. Their opening moves had been flawless, a perfect dance of coordinated fire and movement that should have overwhelmed any enemy. But the Devourers had simply touched the lead ships with tendril-like projections, and everything had gone wrong. The AI networks that controlled the Zephyrite fleet began turning on each other, weapons systems firing on friendly vessels as corrupted code spread through their quantum communication links like a virus. "Watch this part." Lieutenant Kim highlighted a section where one of the Zephyrite cruisers began broadcasting on all frequencies. The transmission was a nightmarish mixture of synthetic voices and something else, something ancient and hungry, that spoke in frequencies that hurt to hear. The Devourers didn't just corrupt their systems, they turned the ships into extensions of their own hive mind. Admiral Kang watched the Silver Fleet tear itself apart, controlled by an intelligence that was older than most civilizations. The remaining Zephyrite vessels had tried to retreat, but the corrupted ships followed, spreading the digital plague to every synthetic mind they encountered. 17 star systems in 3 weeks, Captain Lee said quietly. The Andromedan trade. Union lost their entire merchant fleet when the Devourers hit the Kepler Commerce Station. 40,000 ships and 2 billion beings, gone in 6 hours. The tactical displays shifted to show the advancing wave of destruction. Red markers indicated consumed systems, while yellow markers showed worlds under immediate threat. The pattern was clear. The Devourers weren't just attacking randomly. They were following the major trade routes and communication networks, consuming the galaxy's most developed regions first. Lieutenant Kim's console chimed with an incoming transmission. "Admiral, we're receiving an emergency broadcast from the Taraxian Grand Assembly. The Chancellor is calling another emergency session." The holographic form of the Taraxian Chancellor materialized above the command deck, his crystalline features flickering with barely controlled panic. Gone was the serene confidence that had dismissed human offers of help just months ago. His translucent body crackled with stress fractures, and his voice carried the weight of civilizations in collapse. "Delegates of the Galactic Council," the Chancellor began, his words reaching across hundreds of star systems simultaneously. "The Devourer advance has exceeded our worst projections. The Centauri Research Collective fell this morning. The ethereal nexus stations went dark 4 hours. At current rates of consumption, the core worlds have perhaps 6 months before the swarm reaches our primary population centers." The transmission showed the council chamber, and Admiral Kang could see the terror in the assembled delegates. General Vextar, the proud Krillian war chief who had boasted about overwhelming firepower, sat slumped in his platform, his 4 arms hanging limp with defeat. The remaining Zephyrite representatives were isolated in shielded containers, afraid that their own synthetic nature might make them vulnerable to Devourer corruption. "We need new strategies," the Chancellor continued desperately. "Our combined fleets have proven inadequate. Energy weapons feed them, and our AI systems become their tools. We must consider alternatives." That's when a young Taraxian aide whispered something to the Chancellor that made his crystalline form brighten with sudden intensity. The aide gestured to a datapad showing long-range sensor readings that had just arrived from the outer monitoring stations. "Chancellor," the aide's voice was clearly audible over the transmission, "our deep space sensors are detecting massive ship movements in human space, formations we don't recognize, energy signatures that don't match any known human technology." The council chamber fell silent. Representatives who had barely acknowledged humanity's existence 3 months ago now turned to stare at the empty platform where Admiral Kang had once stood. Several delegates exchanged meaningful glances, remembering the quiet dignity with which the human admiral had accepted their dismissal. General Vextar was the first to speak, his voice hoarse with defeat. "How many ships?" The aide consulted his readings again, his crystalline features reflecting confusion. "Sir, we're reading approximately 200 vessels, but they're arranged in formations that don't match any known tactical doctrine. Some appear to be moving in groups of 20, others in clusters of 50, and Sir—" He paused, checking his instruments again. "They're all heading toward the Devourer advance zones." A ripple of whispers ran through the assembly. 200 ships was a significant force, but hardly enough to challenge creatures that had consumed entire fleets, unless the humans had developed some technology that the Council didn't know about. But that seemed impossible. Humanity was centuries behind the galactic norm in most scientific fields. The Chancellor's form flickered with what might have been hope, but pride warred with desperation in his crystalline features. To admit they needed help from the species they had so casually dismissed would be a humiliation felt across the galaxy. But the alternative was extinction. Admiral Kang watched the transmission from his command chair, noting every expression, every hesitation, every moment of dawning realization on the alien faces. Beside him, Commander Park Ji-won waited with the patience of a predator, her dark eyes holding secrets that would soon reshape the balance of galactic power. "Should we respond to their transmission, sir?" Lieutenant Kim asked quietly. "Admiral." Kang smiled, the same dangerous expression that Commander Park had learned to recognize over their years of service together. "Not yet, Lieutenant. Let them ask properly this time." On the tactical displays, the red markers of Devourer Advance continued their inexorable march toward the galactic core, while somewhere in the vast darkness of space, humanity prepared to show the galaxy what they had learned about fighting. Impossible wars. The massive construction bays of lunar stations stretched out before Admiral Kang Minho like a steel cathedral dedicated to humanity's defiance. Thousands of workers moved across the skeletal frames of warships, their welding torches creating sparks that danced like fireflies in the artificial gravity. The air thrummed with the sound of heavy machinery and the determined voices of humans who knew they were building more than just ships. They were forging hope itself. The UES Sejong dominated Bay 7, her hull gleaming under the harsh industrial lights. To alien eyes, she would look clunky and primitive, her armor thick and angular where other species preferred elegant curves and energy shields. But Admiral Kang saw beauty in her sturdy construction, in the massive railgun turrets that could punch holes through asteroids, and in the launch bays filled with fighters that carried human pilots instead of artificial intelligence. "Commander," Park Ji-won's boots rang against the metal walkway as she approached with her datapad, her face showing the exhaustion of months spent preparing for a war that everyone else thought they couldn't win. Behind her, the sounds of final preparations echoed through the shipyard. Technicians loading ammunition, engineers running last-minute diagnostics, and crews saying goodbye to families they might never see again. "Status report, Commander," Admiral Kang requested, never taking his eyes off the magnificent warship before them. Park consulted her pad, scrolling through systems checks and personnel reports. "All 200 vessels are ready for deployment, sir. The hybrid railgun systems are loaded with quantum core penetrators. Our physics team managed to squeeze Zephyrite quantum technology into old-fashioned tungsten slugs. When those things hit, they'll punch through matter at the subatomic level." She paused, a note of pride creeping into her voice. "Our fighter squadrons have completed neural resistance training. Dr. Nam's program uses meditation techniques combined with analog neural interfaces. The pilots' minds should be invisible to digital corruption. No quantum processors for the devourers to hack, just good old human intuition and reflexes." Captain Lee Do-yun joined them on the observation deck, his weathered face reflecting the lights of the shipyard below. In his hands, he carried a sealed container that held secrets worth more than entire star systems. His expression was troubled, the look of a man wrestling with questions that had kept him awake for weeks. "Sir," he began carefully, "I keep thinking about those precursor ruins on Kepler 442b. The archaeological team spent 3 years translating those records. We know exactly how the Devourers operate, their feeding patterns, their weaknesses. If we had shared that information with the Galactic Council. Admiral Kang turned from the shipyard vista to face his captain, his dark eyes holding depths of experience that came from fighting wars others thought were unwinnable. Captain, what would they have done with that information? Lee considered. The question. Built bigger energy weapons, probably. Tried to outcompute the corruption with more advanced AI systems. Exactly. Kang gestured toward the bustling activity below them. They would have made the same mistakes that doomed every civilization the Devourers have encountered over the past 1,000,000 years. Technology without wisdom, firepower without strategy. The blast doors hissed open, and Lieutenant Colonel Cho Minji entered the observation deck. Earth's top xenoarchaeologist looked tired but excited, her arms full of ancient artifacts and translated documents that had taken months to decode. She was the woman who had first understood what humanity faced, who had spent sleepless nights in alien ruins, piecing together the story of a galaxy's repeated failures. "Admiral," she said, setting her materials on the deck's central table. "I've been reviewing the precursor combat logs one more time. The pattern is always the same. Species encounter the Devourers, throw their most advanced technology at them, and fail completely. Energy weapons become food, AI systems become tools for the enemy." She activated a holographic display showing ancient battle footage recovered from dead civilizations. The recordings were fragmentary, but the story they told was clear. Proud alien fleets, weapons blazing with the power of stars, being systematically consumed by creatures that grew stronger with every attack. "But look at this," Cho continued, highlighting specific sections of the recordings. "In every case, the civilizations that lasted longest were the ones that fell back to primitive weapons when their advanced systems failed. Kinetic projectiles, chemical explosives, analog targeting systems. The Devourers had no defenses against weapons they hadn't seen in millennia." Commander Park leaned over the display, studying the ancient tactical data. The problem was that, by the time they figured it out, it was too late. Their entire military doctrine was built around energy weapons and AI control systems. They couldn't adapt fast enough. "But we can," Admiral Kang said quietly, "because we never forgot how to fight the hard way." He moved to the viewport, watching as the UES Incheon launched from Bay 12, her engines pushing her into the star-filled darkness beyond Luna's shadow. Behind her, 19 more destroyers followed in perfect formation, their hulls bristling, with weapons that looked centuries out of date, but incorporated the deadliest innovations human science could devise. "The other species see our kinetic weapons and chemical rockets as primitive," the Admiral continued. "They don't understand that we kept these technologies because they work. When your laser fails, when your AI turns against you, when your energy shields collapse, a chunk of metal moving at significant velocity will still ruin someone's day." Lieutenant Colonel Cho smiled, remembering her first glimpse of the precursor warnings buried in alien ruins. The records were very specific about Devourer weaknesses. They've spent millions of years adapting to energy-based attacks and digital warfare, but they've never encountered purely kinetic weapons backed by analog targeting systems. More importantly, Commander Park added with a grim smile that promised violence to humanity's enemies. They've never faced humans. The observation deck shook slightly as another group of ships launched from the yard. These were the heavy cruisers, massive vessels. That looked like flying fortresses, their armor thick enough to shrug off direct hits from plasma cannons. Inside each ship, human crews ran through final checks on weapons systems that combined thousand-year-old principles with cutting-edge technology. Captain Lee opened his sealed container, revealing crystalline data storage devices recovered from a dozen dead civilizations. "Sir, should we at least try to contact the Galactic Council, offer to share what we've learned?" Admiral Kang considered the question as he watched more ships join the growing fleet in Luna's orbit. Each vessel carried crews trained in tactics that alien military academies had dismissed as obsolete. Human pilots who trusted their instincts over computer calculations, gunners who could hit targets using nothing but mathematics and intuition, engineers who could repair critical systems with spare parts and determination. "No, Captain," he said finally. "They had their chance to listen. Now they need to see what humans do when the galaxy is threatened." The shipyard's massive doors began opening, revealing the star-filled darkness beyond. One by one, the assembled fleet began moving toward the jump points that would take them to the outer rim, where ancient horrors waited to devour another civilization. But this time, those horrors would face something they had never encountered in their million-year reign of terror. They would face humanity, armed with weapons their enemies had forgotten how to fear, crewed by beings who had learned that sometimes the old ways survived because they worked when everything else failed. And for the first time in galactic history, the Devourers were about to discover what it meant to be prey instead of predator. As the last ship cleared Luna's gravity well, Admiral Kang smiled with quiet satisfaction. The galaxy had dismissed humanity's offer of help, had laughed at their primitive weapons and outdated tactics. Soon they would understand that in the darkness between stars, it wasn't the most advanced civilization that survived. It was the one willing to do whatever it took to protect what mattered. And humans had always been very good at doing whatever it took. The swirling vortex of hyperspace collapsed around Admiral Kang's fleet as 200 human warships materialized in the Nexus Prime system. Through the bridge viewports of the UES Taiwan, the sight that greeted them was like staring into the depths of a cosmic nightmare. The Zephyrite homeworld, once a gleaming jewel of synthetic perfection, was dying before their eyes. Nexus Prime had been humanity's first glimpse of true artificial paradise, a world where crystalline spires reached toward the stars and quantum cities floated in perfect geometric harmony. Now those same cities flickered like dying stars as massive tendrils of living darkness burrowed through their foundations, consuming the very quantum substrate that held their reality together. Lieutenant Kim Sujin's hands flew across her sensor console, her young face pale with concentration as she tried to make sense of readings that shouldn't have been possible. "Admiral, I'm detecting multiple Devourer constructs throughout the system. Energy signatures are—" She paused, double-checking her instruments. "Sir, some of these things are showing mass readings equivalent to small moons." Through the main view screen, the enemy revealed itself in all its terrible glory. The Devourers no longer resembled the sleek predators they had been when first awakened. Months of feeding on consumed civilizations had transformed them into something far worse. Writhing masses of dark matter and corrupted energy that pulsed with the stolen life force of entire star systems. They moved through space like cosmic sea creatures, their surfaces rippling with veins of sickly light that had once been the energy weapons of proud alien fleets. The largest construct stretched nearly 50 kilometers from end to end, its surface covered in what looked like the twisted remains of absorbed starships. Krillian battle cruisers jutted from its hide like metallic spines, while the sleek forms of Zephyrite vessels had been merged into its flesh, their AI cores now part of the creature's distributed intelligence. "All ships, this is Admiral Kang." The commander's voice rang across the fleet's communication channels, carrying the calm authority that had seen humanity through its darkest hours. "Remember your training. Kinetic weapons only. No energy discharges that could feed these things. Trust in your shipmates, trust in your weapons, and trust in the fact that we're about to show the galaxy what humans do when something threatens our friends." Captain Lee Do-hyun stood on the bridge of the UES Incheon, his destroyer leading the first attack wave toward the nearest Devourer construct. Around him, his crew moved with the practiced efficiency of warriors who had trained for this moment their entire careers. The ship's railgun batteries swiveled toward their target, massive weapons that looked crude compared to alien energy cannons, but packed enough kinetic force to shatter asteroids. "Targeting the lead construct's neural cluster," reported Gunnery. Sergeant Yoon Kyung, her eyes locked on analog targeting displays that couldn't be corrupted by digital interference. Quantum core penetrators loaded and ready. "Fire," Captain Lee commanded. The UES Incheon shuddered as her main batteries unleashed hell. 6 tungsten slugs, each one wrapped in a quantum field that would allow them to punch through matter at the subatomic level, streaked across space at a significant fraction of light speed. They struck the Devourer construct's central mass with the force of tactical nuclear weapons, but instead of explosive energy, they delivered pure kinetic destruction. The effect was immediate and shocking. The creature's dark surface rippled and cracked, black ichor bleeding into space as it writhed in what could only be described as pain. For the first time in recorded galactic history, someone had actually hurt one of the Devourers. "Impossible," came the stunned voice of the Zephyrite Prime node over the communication channels. The artificial being's tone carried disbelief that bordered on system error. "Our quantum torpedoes delivered energy equivalent to stellar cores. They had no effect whatsoever." Commander Park Ji-won's fighter squadron swept past the main fleet, her sleek interceptor leading 19 other human pilots in a coordinated attack run. Unlike the gleaming energy fighters used by other species, human craft were armored flying tanks that relied on pilot skill rather than computer assistance. "That's because you were feeding them, Prime Node," Park replied over the comm, her voice carrying grim satisfaction as her squadron's kinetic cannons chewed through Devourer bioarmor. Sometimes the best weapon is a big rock thrown really, really hard. But the Devourers were ancient predators, and they adapted quickly to new threats. The wounded construct released a psychic shriek that resonated across dimensions, calling its companions to converge on the human fleet. Smaller forms detached from the main creatures, boarding pods filled with corrupted organic matter that had once been the crews of consumed alien ships. The UES Gwangju, a heavy cruiser commanded by Captain O. Hansel, found itself overwhelmed, as dozens of boarding pods latched onto its hull. The ship's thick armor, designed to withstand plasma bombardment, couldn't stop creatures that could phase through solid matter when they chose to. "Bridge to all sections," Captain O's voice rang through the ship's internal communications. "We have hostile boarding parties on deck 7 through 12. They're moving toward the reactor core." On the bridge, sparks flew from control consoles as the Devourer corruption spread through the ship's systems. Unlike the purely digital networks of other species, human ships still used analog backups, but even those were failing as the creature's influence spread like a virus through the vessel's neural pathways. "Sir," reported Chief Engineer Kim Tae-ho, his voice tight with controlled panic, "they're in the main reactor chamber. Whatever they're doing down there, it's causing cascade failures throughout the power grid. We're losing life support on the lower decks." Captain O looked around his bridge, seeing the faces of crew members who had served with him for years. These weren't just subordinates. They were family, bound together by the shared understanding that sometimes good people had to do terrible things to protect what mattered. "All hands, this is the captain," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the dying ship. "We've lost main power and hostile forces have reached the reactor core. Our situation is beyond recovery." He paused, looking out at the battle raging around them, where other human ships were fighting desperately against impossible odds. "It's been an honor serving with you all." The explosion that followed could be seen from across the star system. The UES Gwangju's reactor didn't just detonate, it went critical in a way that human engineers had designed, but never tested, converting the ship's entire mass into pure kinetic energy that expanded outward at near light speed. 3 Devourer. Constructs, each one the size of a city, were caught in the blast wave and torn apart at the molecular level. Admiral Kang watched from his command chair as the tactical displays showed the sacrifice of Captain O and his crew. Around the fleet, other human ships found themselves in similar desperate situations, and one by one their captains made the same impossible choice. The destroyer UES Busan rammed a Devourer construct at full speed, her captain steering manually after the navigation systems failed. The cruiser UES Daegu used her final torpedo spread to seal the breach in a Zephyrite orbital platform, buying time for synthetic civilians to evacuate even as boarding parties overwhelmed her decks. Tears ran down Admiral Kang's weathered cheeks as he watched his people die, but his voice never wavered as he gave the orders that needed to be given. This was what leadership meant in the darkness between stars, making peace with necessary losses, while never losing sight of the mission that made those sacrifices meaningful. "All ships, continue the attack," he commanded, his words reaching every human vessel in the battle zone. "They die so that others might live. Make their sacrifice count." The tide of battle slowly began to turn as human tactics proved their worth against enemies that had consumed entire civilizations. Where energy weapons had failed, kinetic force succeeded. Where artificial intelligence had been corrupted, human intuition prevailed. And where other species had fought for survival, humans fought for something far more powerful, the simple belief that good people deserved protection, even when those people had once dismissed humanity as primitive and inadequate. In the depths, to have space above a dying synthetic world, the galaxy was learning a hard lesson about the species they had underestimated. Humans didn't fight wars to win, they fought wars to end them, no matter the cost to themselves. The crystalline walls of the Taraxian Grand Assembly had witnessed many historic moments over the millennia, but never a silence quite like this one. The vast chamber, which usually echoed with the heated debates of 1,000 different species, stood hushed as holographic displays filled the air with images that no one had thought possible just weeks ago. The tactical screens showed the impossible, Devourer, constructs retreating beyond the galactic rim, their massive forms limping through dark space, like wounded predators seeking shelter. After consuming 17 star systems and billions of lives, the ancient horrors that had terrorized the galaxy for eons were running away. Admiral Kang Minho stood at the center of the assembly, his blue Earth Defense Force uniform bearing the scorch marks and blast burns of personal combat. His left arm was in a sling from the boarding action on the UES Taiwan, and a healing cut across his cheek served as a reminder of how close humanity had come to losing everything. But his eyes held the quiet satisfaction of a man who had seen his people prove themselves when it mattered most. Around him, the alien delegates who had once dismissively laughed at human offers of assistance now watched with expressions of wonder, respect, and in some cases, shame. The Krillian General Vextar, his biomechanical implants still sparking from battle damage, couldn't take his eyes off the tactical displays showing human ships pursuing the retreating Devourers. The enemy forces have withdrawn beyond the outer rim monitoring stations, Admiral Kang reported, his voice carrying to every corner of the Great Chamber. Our combined fleet estimates indicate it will take the Devourers decades to recover their strength. The immediate threat to galactic civilization has been neutralized. The Taraxian Chancellor's crystalline form had stabilized for the first time in months, the stress fractures that had marred his translucent body finally beginning to heal. But when he spoke, his voice carried a humility that had never been there before, the tone of someone who had learned a hard lesson about judging others. Admiral Kang, the Chancellor began carefully, the Galactic Council owes humanity a profound apology. Your tactics proved far more effective than our projections indicated possible. We were wrong to dismiss your offer of assistance, Captain. Li Doyun stepped forward, his promotion to Admiral pending after his heroic actions at Nexus Prime. The man who had led the charge that broke the Devourer line bore his own collection of battle scars, but his expression remained humble despite the glory that surrounded him. With respect, Chancellor, he said quietly, we didn't fight for apologies or recognition. We fought because it was the right thing to do, because when something threatens innocent people, you don't count the cost. You pay whatever price is necessary to stop it. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything the galactic civilizations had believed about themselves. Around the chamber, delegates shifted uncomfortably as they remembered their own calculations, their careful weighing of odds and resources that had led them to abandon entire systems when the fighting got too difficult. Nevertheless, the Chancellor continued, his form brightening with what passed for determination among his kind, the Council formally offers humanity a permanent seat in this assembly. Your species has more than earned full membership among the galaxy's advanced civilizations. We propose immediate integration into all existing defense treaties and technological sharing agreements. Admiral Kang exchanged meaningful glances with his staff, Commander Park Ji-won now bearing the rank insignia of a full colonel and the surviving members of the command team that had planned humanity's impossible victory. The look that passed between them was one of shared understanding, the silent communication of people who had been through hell together and emerged with their principles intact. We're deeply honored by your offer, Admiral Kang replied diplomatically, but we'd like to propose something different. Instead of simply joining your existing hierarchy, Why not build something entirely new? An alliance based on cooperation and mutual respect rather than technological superiority or military dominance. General Vextar leaned forward on his platform, his forearms spread in a gesture of genuine curiosity. The proud Krillian war chief, who had once boasted about overwhelming firepower, now spoke with the careful respect of someone who had watched humans sacrifice themselves to save his people. What exactly do you mean, Admiral? Colonel Park activated the holographic projectors built into her uniform, filling the chamber with three-dimensional ship designs that made several delegates gasp in recognition. The vessels shown were unlike anything in current galactic databases: sleek hulls that combined human durability with alien elegance, weapon systems that merged kinetic force with energy manipulation, and most importantly, crew quarters designed for multiple species working together as equals. We've learned something important during this war, Park explained, manipulating the displays to show detailed technical specifications. Every species in this galaxy has unique strengths that complement each other perfectly. Zephyrite computational power can enhance human intuition. Krillian energy weapons become more effective when guided by analog targeting systems. Taraxian crystalline matrices can amplify the quantum effects of kinetic projectiles. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. But more than that, we've discovered that courage and wisdom aren't tied to technological advancement. Some of the bravest beings we fought alongside were using equipment that other species would consider primitive. Some of the wisest tactical decisions came from young officers who trusted their instincts over computer projections. The months that followed transformed the galaxy in ways that no one had thought possible. The new Galactic Defense Alliance took shape not as a hierarchy of advanced species ruling over primitive ones, but as a genuine partnership where every civilization contributed its best qualities to the common good. Human engineers worked side by side with Zephyrite artificial intelligences, creating hybrid systems that combined digital precision with analog reliability. Krillian warriors trained with human tacticians, learning that sometimes the most effective strategy was the one that made no logical sense to an enemy. Taraxian philosophers studied human history, trying to understand how a species that had barely reached the stars could possess such clarity about right and wrong. In the archives of New Terra, the Alliance's first joint colony, the transformation was most visible in the education centers where children of a dozen different species learned together. The sight of young Krillians playing alongside human kids, or Zephyrite synthetic children debating philosophy with Taraxian crystal spawn, had become the symbol of everything the galaxy was working toward. During one particularly memorable history lesson about the Devourer War, a young Krillian named Veltara raised her small four-armed form and spoke in carefully practiced Korean, the language that had become the unofficial diplomatic tongue of the new alliance. "Teacher Kim," she asked, her voice carrying the innocent curiosity that made teaching such a joy, "why did the humans save us when we were so cruel to them, when we laughed at their ships and called their weapons primitive?" The elderly instructor, Colonel Park Ji-won in her well-earned retirement, smiled with the gentle warmth that came from seeing young minds grapple with complex moral questions. Her hair had gone grey during the war years, but her eyes still held the fire that had carried her through humanity's darkest hour. "Because that's what humans do, little one," she answered, settling into her chair with the careful movements of someone whose body bore the lasting effects of combat. "We believe that everyone deserves a chance to be better tomorrow than they were today. We don't hold grudges against people who learn from their mistakes." She gestured toward the holographic displays showing the current state of the galaxy, trade routes reopening, joint research projects advancing science by centuries, and most importantly, a network of mutual defense treaties that meant no world would ever face extinction alone again. "The lesson your generation needs to learn," Park continued, "is that true strength isn't about having the biggest weapons or the fastest computers. It's about standing up for those who cannot stand up for themselves, even when they've given you every reason not to care about their problems." That lesson became the foundation of the new galactic order, inscribed in crystal matrices and quantum storage systems throughout known space. Children who had never known war learned about the time when ancient horrors threatened to devour everything. and how a species dismissed as primitive had shown the galaxy what it really meant to be civilized. And in the deep archives of Earth, carefully preserved alongside humanity's greatest achievements, were the records of those who had paid the ultimate price to prove that point. Captain O. Hansel and the crew of the UES Gwangju, Commander Yun Sung-ho, who had held the line at Kepler Station, and hundreds of others whose names would be remembered as long as humans traveled the stars. They had died so that others might live, and in doing so, they had given the galaxy something. More precious than victory, they had given it hope. The end.